We're live. It's Wednesday, March 13th. This is the Senate Transportation Committee. We're talking about the electric vehicle charging in general, and specifically the House as proposed as on the House Transportation Committee, the T-bill. But in there's some discussion of electric vehicle charging equipment and how that's deployed, but we have a program in the state now that is doing this. And so we have Brian Cook from ACCD here to tell us about that. And GMP is in the room, who's partnering on the program, and also Wayne. Okay, so take it away.
So for the record, my name is Bronwyn Cook. I'm a Community Planning and Policy Manager with Department of Housing and Community Development. I have some slides to review a program that we've been running since roughly June of this year. It's building off of a pilot program that we had the previous year. So my slides are going to cover the pilot program because I think it's actually been a while since I've done Senate Transportation. So we'll give you sort of the update on the pilot program and then move over into the current program that we're running. I do also have our administrators here from GMP who, if you have any real detailed questions about more drilled in of the administration of the program at the moment, they'll be able to fill in for me. So I'll start off with the overview and share my screen.
When was the pilot part?
The pilot started was in 2022, and those projects are still being implemented. So it's one of the lessons learned that these are sometimes really tough projects to figure out.
And was that with the VW money, or are you going to tell us all this?
That was with state funds. Yeah, I'll give you a quick background on sort of all of our division's work in EV charging. So I'll give you that quick background, but then focus mostly on the sort of the multi-unit and the workplace charging programs. So just as a quick reminder of where I sit, who my team is, I work in community planning and revitalization, which is in Department of Housing and Community Development. We run the designation program. We do Better Places programs, Better Connections programs. We work a lot in transportation, community development, that sort of field. And we also do a little work in electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So long before I joined the team back in 2014, we kind of dipped our toe into EVSE charging with some of the VW settlement funds. Our focus at that time was trying to make sure those investments were going into our downtowns and our villages as sort of an economic driver, bringing people into town, using charging, spending money at local stores, et cetera. So it was sort of an economic development engine for us, no pun intended, I suppose. Most of the work that we had done up until 2021 was entirely public facing. So level 3 fast charging, level 2 charging out in public places and municipal parking lots, et cetera, really focused on that public facing network. As we were doing this work, there was a lot of acknowledgement that public facing charging, that public network is very important, certainly for people to be able to top off when they're on road trips or just kind of know that they can get a charge when they're in town. But the majority of charging is really expected to be done at home. 80% of charging at home. It's more convenient. Your car is sitting there anyway for 6 to 8 hours, depending on how long you sit. And it's supposed to be less expensive because you're on sort of, home electricity rates, et cetera. However, for folks who live in multi-unit properties and folks who are renters, they don't own the property, there's a lot of barriers to being able to access home charging. You don't have necessarily the authority to be able to install an EVSE charger. So with that in mind, we sort of shifted gears and started focusing on how to get access, how to solve those barriers for tenants in multi-unit properties. So in 2022, we ran a $1 million pilot program with the idea of, multi-unit buildings are just a lot more challenging to work in terms of providing infrastructure. The parking is shared, not necessarily dedicated spaces. The parking isn't necessarily attached to the building. It's maybe a little further from the panel or from the meter. It's shared, it has to be shared infrastructure. So how do you appropriately sort of pass on the cost of electricity to the tenants, et cetera? There's just a lot of challenges for the technological solutions there. So the pilot was intended to work with property owners of multi-unit properties to help figure out what are these solutions that work for the property, but also could work for the tenant who might want to be charging. So the $1 million program focused on properties with 10 or more units and affordable housing providers. So that first round of grant funds, the only eligible property owners were 10 plus units and affordable housing providers. We weren't sure, how the uptake was going to be, but we ended up being oversubscribed on the program, so it became competitive. We made awards to about 10 different property owners, some who have multiple properties, so Cathedral Square, Champlain Housing Trust, for example, and they were going to work on installing EV chargers in their properties, which is great. From that pilot project, we awarded essentially 39 different locations, so 39 new locations of multi-unit properties that hadn't had charging before. And we were kind of excited about that because it's shared infrastructure. So of all of the residents that lived or were within walking distance of those locations, it was 6,000 residents who previously had not seen EV charging at their properties and are now able to see charging at their properties. It was in testimony yesterday, and a good question came up and said, yeah, but that, those 39 locations and the 2 chargers that went in, that's not enough to serve 6,000 residents, which of course it's not. The idea is not all of those residents have EVs yet. They might not for a few years, but putting that infrastructure in just kind of signals to those tenants that if you want to think about an EV, yeah, now you have a place that you might be able to charge at home, and it makes it a little bit more realistic and convenient for them. So of those projects that were awarded, I'd say a little less than half at this point are completed. They're challenging. The affordable housing providers are, this is new to them. Providing EV charging is not something that's always been in their wheelhouse, so it's been a big learning curve for them. Finding contractors is sometimes challenging. The timelines for that can be challenging. One of the things that we wanted to kind of find out is, what is really the cost of installing EVSE in locations like this? So these numbers are the estimates from the applications. Again, because we're still seeing projects close out, we'll be able to update this with more accurate actual costs once the projects are all done. But based on the applications, the rough cost for installing a dual port, so 2-headed level 2 charging station in a multi-unit was around $26,000. About a third of that cost is just the hardware itself, just the physical piece of equipment. 2/3 of that is panel upgrades, trenching, site work, labor. So we're seeing the majority of the cost being on that sort of site cost side.
Team size.
26. Yeah, I mean.
I guess in the installation, that's a broad. Or I guess the 9,000 for the equipment price for it seems is the high part.
Yeah, and equipment, it's still sort of early days, I would say, in terms of service providers. There's certainly the equipment that is intended for shared use tends to be more expensive than the equipment that someone might just put in their single family home, because it has all of these components to allow for metering the electricity separately, a card swipe to be able to pay and activate and accurately charge people. So the equipment for shared definitely is more expensive than the equipment that's just meant for one person attached to their personal meter, electric meter. Some of the challenges I mentioned already was just one of the big things that I think we sort of wrapped into our current program. When property owners are getting estimates for this, when we started this, they were getting sort of desktop estimates. Somebody sitting somewhere far away would pull up their property on a map and say, it's roughly this much. But then when you actually show up to the property and you actually look at the electrical panel and you actually look at the slope of this or whatever, the costs were not quite as as accurate. So that's one of the things that we've addressed in our new program, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but certainly that was a challenge for these projects.
But they had to come back and ask for their grant to change. They're still making it work.
So yeah, we're still making it work, and a lot of them had to, in some cases the estimates were over, which was great. So they, especially grantees that had multiple sites, they were able to sort of flex within their individual sites to stay within their total grant amount, but still get the projects done. Finding contractors was difficult. I think particularly just being able to compare if you're getting multiple quotes from different contractors. How do you even ask for those quotes so that you can compare and know that you're comparing apples to apples? It's just really challenging when you're not familiar with the equipment or the landscape of EVSE charging. So quite a few challenges that we've been sort of ironing out with these grantees, and again, using this as a way to learn, are there best practices? Are there best ways of doing installations, and what kind of equipment works really well for these types of properties? So that program is still ongoing in the sense that those projects are still being installed and completed. And as we were implementing that program, we received additional funds to the legislature to expand the program. We received 10 million and kind of immediately carved out 7 million of that to partner with an administrator who could help us run a much larger program. The program at that point expanded, so it wasn't just multi-unit, it also expanded to workplaces. Part of the idea is, having charging at workplaces is great just for anybody, but it's also particularly great for tenants, because if you aren't going to see charging in your home, then maybe you are going to be able to see charging at work, and that also kind of helps you fill the charging need.
And can you remind me, was this in the T-bill? Was this
yes,
general funds?
General funds in the T-bill. Yeah, so multi-unit workplaces, and then it also included community attractions. So continuing that sort of public-facing public network in places that really attract a lot of drivers. So that was a big expansion, going from 1 million to 7 million. So we wanted to find an administrative partner that had a little bit more technical experience on the ground to help us provide, sort of wraparound support services to applicants of the program. We put out an RFP. We selected Green Mountain Power to administer the program. Tried to make it very clear that this does not mean that you are only eligible if you are in GMP territory. It's that GMP is providing this for anybody in any utility territory. They've got really great connections with other utilities. They have great connections with contractors on the ground. They understand electricity, which is incredibly helpful. So we partnered with them to administer the program. We launched it in June of 2023. We launched originally just level 1 and level 2 incentives for multi-unit workplace and community charging. Just this past January, we have launched another sort of carve out of the program that is for public level 3 charging. That is a competitive program because the funds are very small, and it's really it's even more challenging to find appropriate sites for level 3 than it is for the other programs.
Why would you level 1, which I thought was just essentially plugging in your car in an outlet?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, an extension cord. Why would you need a grant for that, I guess?
Yeah.
Since most people do have an extension cord and an outlet.
So the reason that I've advocated to continue supporting level 1 is we're thinking about property owners who may not be really gung-ho yet on a full level 2 solution, knowing that especially the shared level 2 solutions, they still can require maintenance and ongoing fees that a property owner is going to have to wrestle with and figure out how to, kind of make that work. Level 1, for most people, maybe that doesn't seem very, if I was in my own single family home, I would say, I'm just going to go ahead and shell out $2,000 for level 2, and that's going to work really well for me.
But if I'm a utility to take advantage of the free ones.
Yeah, and take advantage of the free ones, absolutely. But if those options are not available to you, and if you have a property owner who's kind of on the fence about this, a level 1 can actually be, I still think, a very good sort of entry point. It can be very low cost, and you could install level 1 at each individual parking spot if you wanted at a lower cost than providing the sort of fancier level 2 shared equipment. So again, the part of the program was trying to figure out what works for people, and we didn't want to take level 1 off the table if that was going to be the thing that actually got a property owner engaged in this, starting to do this.
Experience.
So there's a lot of interest in the program. Let's see, I'm gonna skip ahead a bit. So within the program, there's a lot of sort of caps to ensure that the funds are spread across.
And so this Charge Vermont is a new kind of brand just for the program,
Correct.
not to be confused with Drive Vermont.
Drive Electric
Electric,
Vermont? Yeah, no. We work
Not to be
closely.
confused with everything
Anything
else.
else?
Yeah.
But it's a program within ACCD.
It is administered by ACCD in partnership with Green Mountain Power, but it has its own brand name just to, again,
It's on
kind
the
of
website.
build some, right.
The website is yours though.
Right now, GMP is hosting it while we're under contract. So how's the program? Oh, sorry.
Can you go back a slide?
Yeah.
So I'm going to make a comment that I made to Patrick Murphy, and maybe you've already heard it before. I'm just worried that 5, 10, 20 years from now, if we achieve what we want, which is more electric vehicles, they're going to castigate us or blame us for not being more thoughtful as to where we put the electrical chargers. And I know it's more expensive to put it out into a median or to a more central large area for a larger parking spot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm concerned that if we don't allow for multiple vehicles to, on the other side of these things, to also pull up, we're going to have increasing amounts of charge rage. So I'm curious if you have in your designs an idea or a preference to try to, I know it will cost more to trench into a more centralized location, but to allow for more vehicles to pull up next to it. And then the other question I have really is, are we going to be tracking usage rates of these charging stations so that we'll know what the subscription, how many hours people are actually plugging into them?
First question about siting. We don't work, so other than following, ADA accessibility guidelines, et cetera, we don't make requirements around that. It's all very site specific. And, oftentimes you're having to work with what is available at a building site, at a parking lot site. I will say one of the challenges of having something central is now you have to protect it from all sides, from plows, from people hitting it. So, we often, when property owners are installing this, they're having to talk to their maintenance folks to say, are you okay with being able to plow around this thing? Is it gonna, and I have seen stations go in brand new, and then we have a really bad winter, and the station just completely knocked over by snow, even with bollards there to protect it. So it would be nice to have, as much access as possible, but it really depends on the site and the parking configuration and sort of what you're working with. So very site specific. I do think the sort of pull through, like with level 3 in particular, the sort of pull through options like a gas station is, again, something that kind of needs to be sorted. But I'd say we're still a little ways from like sort of best practice for every location. And then the second part of your question.
Will we be getting, because I
Yes,
understand this is like a year, are we tracking and going to have a report back so that we know these stations, if they're used?
Yep.
Increasing usage rates and how many hours, how many people are plugging in?
Yep. So for the pilot program, all of the grantees, part of their contract is that they provide usage data to us if they are connected to a network. Because this is intended to serve essentially a private property, renters, we did not require that the equipment be made available to the general public. It can be made available if they want to, and in which case it needs to be networked, and so they can get that data out of the station. So for those properties that are using networked equipment, they are expected to report actual usage to us. For properties that are using non-networked equipment, they just need to give us some sort of indication of, how are you keeping track of the use? Are you seeing people use it? It's a little less, refined data, but it's still useful. And again, it gives the property owner the choice to say, I don't want to pay for network services because they can be expensive if not a lot of people are using the station, especially yet. So we are going to be getting usage data out of all of our equipment that is through those grants up through the pilot. with the GMP program, we are not going to be getting data out of those, but we're not gonna be getting use data out of those unless it's level 3. But that's, we're looking at maybe 500 pieces of equipment. So, we're hoping to get more out of what's the cost to install, sort of the ongoing, rather than like daily use data out of that equipment. Again, except for level 3. Level 3 public facing with those networked, we do want to be understanding how those sort of highly used stations are getting used.
As a quick follow-up, I just make an argument for future legislators sitting around this table. That use data is going to be really important 5 years from now to justify or determine if we need to double down on these investments, scale back, or so on. So I hope that we're proactively thinking about ways to collect those in a systematic manner.
I think also the question is understanding better where those investments need to come from, and the extent to which public funds versus, certainly when gas stations first came, I don't think the state of Vermont was actually putting out grants to, the companies selling the product underwrote that. And, and we see that to some extent with GMP, providing a no charge, the level 2 chargers at home. Obviously people have to have the 220 line and pay for the installation. And if you're like my son, you're going to have a granite post to hang your equipment, so plowed over maybe. So I guess that, I sit on the money committee, as does Andy, and we're just getting overwhelmed with all the different ways and all the different needs that are articulated. And you come to the conclusion that government in the little state of Vermont by itself isn't going to be able to get us here. So I guess I'm saying we're making some investments. We're obviously rejiggering money in the transportation bill, which means that it's not being used for other parts of the transportation infrastructure. And ultimately, it's how do we broaden the participation and the financial support to kind of get us to where we want to be. That's my only thing is, it's got to be broader than the state investments. We know that ChargePoint and some of the companies, they're underwriting that. What is the I don't know what the long-term potential is. There may be other businesses, and particularly if you're a restaurant or you're a store, you may want to invest in it because then customers, it means it's in my economic interest to provide it. So I'll do that as part of my customer service. And so I'm just saying, as we look to the future, we've got to have some discussions around that collective investment and where it's going to be made, because this is an agenda that fiscally the state of Vermont cannot undertake by itself.
You have to have buy-in from the public for this to succeed. All of it. If your electric vehicles are here to stay, the public needs to buy into it. They have to believe in it, and they're not just doing it because there was a $7,500 incentive and free charging and all that. They have to believe and buy in. It's what they want. They're going to have to want to go out and seek an electric vehicle and pony up the expense of what it costs to own one. And Senator Kidgel, you hit on all the points, and I don't want to just seem like I'm repeating what you said, but you have to get business owners to see the value of having a business model to have people come and have
How do you sell your product, I guess?
Well, that usage data would help do that. So even if it's not for us to decide.
No, I'm talking longer term, because in the scheme of things, and obviously the take up of electric vehicles, you have to deal with the comfort and assurances. For example, a colleague coming up from Brattleboro went to the charging stations and they were out of order. Well, if they're out of order, it's not as though you've got like a gas station, and when you're out of power, I can tell you, you are out of power, because I have been out of power. So
on a cold winter morning, that's
I know.
just not normal.
I know. So Hail Marys only get you so far, and didn't get me quite far enough. So I'm just thinking about longer term, where do we see these other investments coming in? Obviously, when you're giving out grants, everybody loves grants. Everybody loves that free money. And so, you know, why wouldn't we have good take-up, generally speaking? But in the scheme of things, to do that robust network so that people won't have, you know, if you've only got 2 stations and they're out, and you don't have enough left in your battery to make it to the one 30 miles away, we've got to deal with that security as well. And so that's only my 2 cents as I'm looking at, you know, 7 million, and we're seeing what is being proposed. But ultimately, where are those partnerships? Where are those other funds gonna come from?
And I get what you said too about the government didn't build very many fuel supply stations, but
Maybe they did, but I don't remember. I'm old, but I don't remember that.
No, but they did put power lines in. They then eventually later, I mean, it came to folks that are sitting across the room to take that on and later on, and then to put that investment up. So yeah, government has helped electrification, but at the end, they realized at that point in time that we're at the point what you just said.
I don't know, well, except for the oil depletion allowance, I suppose, you know, we don't generally help them.
So let's let Bronwyn finish. We'll figure this, your macro problem out.
Well, I can speak a little bit to, so a couple of things. The program is set up so that we are trying to get property owners to leverage other sources of funding. If they're eligible for tax credits, leveraging those funding sources
There
as
are
well.
credits for the chargers.
There are credits for the charges for some of these properties, so we're getting, trying to get them to leverage those tax credits. We're also, if there's other incentives available to them through their utility, or any through their tenants, OEMs, any sort of other incentive, trying to get them to leverage those dollars in addition to these. But you're absolutely right. This needs to be about how do we eventually leverage private investment as well. I think this program is really focused on this niche where private investment doesn't have a strong driver yet. A property owner doesn't have a strong driver yet to be installing this. But if we don't, tenants are just going to get left behind. They'll be the last folks to have access to home charging. So we're really trying to drive that market to, again, come up with the solutions, start to make this a best practice so that, I like to think that maybe someday EV charging is going to be, it's going to be just like a washer and dryer in your unit. Some don't have it, and maybe that's okay, but attractive units maybe have a washer and dryer in the unit itself. Okay, that's great. If not, shared in the basement. And if not, at least they've got the hookups so the tenant can do it, right? Like I would love to get EV charging to be that sort of common, but we're still a little ways from that, and we still have to kind of provide what are those best practices. And so these funds are trying to drive that market and fill that market gap.
Yeah, I'm thinking about just the network overall.
The network overall needs a lot more, yeah. And I think there's other sort of niches in that market where the private investment case is stronger, and those will continue to be made, but certainly like level 3 is still challenging. I don't know that anybody's really like making money on level 3 just yet, because you have to have the drivers there, and it's the chicken and egg game. You can't have the drivers until you have the infrastructure.
And they're doing it in places like LA where there's millions of electric cars, but it's hard for somebody to do the investment here. Are you you have testimony, or you're just here to answer questions and be supportive of it?
I was going to move over into what the program looks like right now in terms of uptake, and I have the slides if you want to just take over and do the sort of, this is how many applications we have and what it looks like across the county. You're welcome to if you want.
Because I just also had some kind of GMP kind of questions, which I don't know if you're.
And for the record, I'm Maddie Murray-Clausen from Green Mountain Power's innovation team. If you want to move through the slides, and then I can answer.
How about I will do this? I'll give you the overview of what the program looks like right now very quickly, and then we can go into detailed questions. So a lot of interest, right? It's an incentive. Of course, there's a lot of interest. We've got roughly 376 applications in our pipeline. We're calling it as of late February.
To go back.
Yep.
Those were monthly applications, so.
Not monthly, it's cumulative, my
Okay.
apologies.
Oh.
This is just to show that there was sort of a big rush, and then things have, sort of steadied out a little
It's a
bit.
rolling initiative.
Yes, it is
First
rolling,
come, first served.
first come, first serve. As long as you meet the eligibility criteria, you can then submit a full application, which includes design drawings, et cetera. The incentive is available to folks if they've, once they've gone through all those steps. The incentive is available up front, which was very important feedback from our first round of pilot program, which is that thanks for the grant money, but if we have to carry the full cost of this project until funds are reimbursed, that doesn't work for a lot of the property owners and folks that we want to be reaching with these funds. So we are able to provide a portion of the incentive up front so that they're not having to carry that cost.
So, the take up on applications, are you getting many from many of our housing authorities? In fact, have St. Johnsbury probably, they have the greatest number of apartments. Are they participating? Are you finding they're applying?
Yep.
I just was wondering what that connection was.
Yeah, we're still seeing a lot of affordable housing providers submit applications, maybe less so because we did already have a much larger pilot program that was targeted just towards the affordable housing providers. But yes, we're still seeing affordable housing providers interested in doing this. So where we're at sort of with the program funds, this is a little wonky, but it's because it's a rolling application and we have a whole, 376 applications that we are processing, and we kind of have to keep in our minds what's their total incentive that they're available for. But when actual incentives go out the door, that number is constantly shifting because, we're seeing, pleasantly so, that some of the projects are actually not meeting their full incentive amount. And so we're able to recapture those funds and keep the applications rolling. But what we've been looking at just in terms of how to communicate to the general public, how are these funds, how's it going? The incentive amount is that column on the left. So that's the total incentive amount we have for each of those categories of programming. The pipeline max is the total incentive amount the total demand on the incentive based on all the applications that have come through. So we're essentially at this point oversubscribed. We have far more interested property owners than we have incentives to provide. One thing to note is that, the numbers make it look like, well, maybe multi-residential isn't in such high demand, but it had a higher incentive amount to begin with. So that's sort of the fact that
prioritize within the categories.
The way we prioritize
Rank the applications. Yeah.
So it's not we don't prioritize in the sense of doing competitive grants. It's not that we're waiting for everyone to come in and rank them against each other. It's if you meet the eligibility requirements, then you are eligible for the incentive.
You have
But we
buckets, you have
do
limited, you have monies and buckets.
yes.
Yeah.
So to prioritize in the legislation, there was directive to prioritize smaller workplaces with under 100 employees, smaller properties with less than a certain number of units. So this is how we've done that, is the way we prioritized in this rolling is to dedicate a majority, 60% of the funding just for those types of properties, smaller multi-units, smaller workplaces. We also put a cap on the amount that any one county can get to try and make sure that there's funding available for, NEK and some of those other counties to give them some more time to take up this program, knowing that there's going to be a high demand.
How do you set that? Obviously, you can't, Essex County, sorry, Russ, but there are not a lot of people there compared to Chittenden County. So what's your method to get the equity across counties?
Yeah. What we started with was a baseline, was just knowing that, 7 million sounds like a lot, but it's a drop in the bucket. Exactly. Yeah. So knowing that, putting that 10% cap, which we are now trying to consider, in not to confuse things, but we're looking to move that cap essentially to a floor to say every county is going to have access. The cap is 486,000 every county will have access to at least 486,000. And so even though Essex County might not have as many multi-unit, they still have plenty of multi-unit and workplaces that could eat up 486 if they, wanted to. It's not a lot of funding in that regard. So we started with a cap to make sure that, nothing against Chittenden County, but we know that there's high demand there, that they didn't just eat up all the funds right away. We wanted to make sure funds remained available to other counties. Again, now we're looking to move that to a floor so that we can continue to make sure that those funds are available to counties that might take a little bit longer to find those property owners and work it out with their utilities, et cetera. Does that answer all your questions on that? Okay, I think that's all I wanted to say. So speaking of counties and where we're at, obviously there's a really high demand in Chittenden County that we're not going to be able to meet with our existing funds because of those caps and for the equity purposes. However, there's other counties that still have a little bit of room. We're still seeking out property owners and applications from those counties and doing a little bit more sort of one-on-one work to really reach out and get applications from those counties.
When you said, how did you define community attraction?
Good question. Community attraction is defined as a place that provides arts, cultural, outdoor activities that's for the general public, or and it's parking that's available for that, or parking that is within a 5-minute walk of those types of amenities. So it certainly has been one of the more challenging things to like nail down what exactly do we mean when we say a public attraction. So yeah. And I think the competitive grants for DC Fast Charge, the pre-application, we have all of our pre-applications in. I think we have like close to 60 applications. So we'll be reviewing those for just to make sure they meet the core eligibility for the DC Fast Charge. Again, we know that there's need for redundancy in some places when stations are down. We know that there's just generally a need for more equipment, but with these funds, we wanted to focus on trying to get level 3 charging out into those places of the state that still don't have any level 3 charging and are further than 10 miles from existing level 3 charging. So we're really trying to kind of close some of those access gaps across the state.
Some of our community attractions are only seasonal. So how do you deal with that? What would be some year-round community attractions?
So I always think of the ski mountains, right?
Well, I was going to say ski area.
But so a lot of the ski areas, because they're trying to address.
I know, no, at Burke, we've got actually probably more other summer. Yeah.
So, right. So that's the thing is even the things that we typically think of as seasonal are now trying to do year-round stuff. So even the ski resorts are places that they have summer and fall activity year-round. So still, potentially a good place for level 3 charging.
I don't necessarily think of them as community attractions as opposed to, I don't know, like the Flynn Theater or, those kinds of.
I think the challenge that we're trying to.
Libraries, those kinds.
Yeah. So to your point earlier about, in some cases, this is really just a business investment, right? So those locations that are far from any other attraction, we may need to look at those a little closer and say, you know what, this is really a business thing for you because there's no other attractions. But if it's let's say, we've had some examples of business owners that are in a downtown area and they say, hey, I know you're having a hard time finding a parking lot to put a level 3 charger in. We'll happily put it in our parking lot and it will be available to anybody, any person that's coming, not just to our business, but any business in the downtown. And that's a great way to think about a true community attraction. If it's a municipal parking lot that has a green and it's also serving a bunch of the other businesses. But I do think some of those places that we typically think of as public attractions, but are really just kind of isolated entities, we're gonna have to rethink how we provide support to them through the program, because it's not as.
So with the fast charging, I assume you're coordinating with AOT and their whole energy program and all of the requirements that they're doing.
Yeah, and the nice thing, I suppose, at the moment is that in some of our past grant rounds, the locations that we were looking at were, our downtown designated areas, which was sometimes just a couple
Yeah.
miles off from what the federal requirements were. And that was problematic because, now we're trying to find multiple locations that are really close to one another.
Yeah.
With this competitive, that won't be an issue because NEVI is not interested. The federal funds are not interested in some of these more kind of tucked away places like Bristol. Bristol does not have a level 3 within 10 miles of its town. So that would be, Brandon doesn't have one. So the NEVI program to date is not necessarily interested in those locations where our program can fill that gap. So I think that's all I had. We talked about the eligibility, more than 10 miles from an existing DC fast charge. Really quick, we also, sorry BGS, I didn't forget about you. We do have a program per the legislation to provide publicly accessible charging in state workplaces. So that was funds that came to ACCD. We said, that sounds like a job for BGS. So we partnered and signed an MOU recently with BGS. So BGS will be using $500,000 to install EV charging at state workplaces. They have a whole sort of matrix for how they're selecting locations based on employee feedback around where EV charging might be needed, and then also trying to look at where these stations would be most useful for being publicly accessible.
Well,
And that's it.
Work for fleet too.
Right. So one of the, I don't know if you just want to answer the question from over there, Matt, but you could also come up. Is with the need to think about how charging is affecting the overall grid and demand as we get more of these, is GMP playing a role in this, or just doing kind of administration of the grant program, or are you also kind of trying to integrate that thinking and maybe even requiring that interconnection so that GMP could get more data or even control the chargers, put it on their EV charging rate, things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, Maddie Murray-Clausen from GMP's innovation team. Thanks for having me. Right now, we're working on the next round of our integrated resources plan, which will encompass a ton of great forecasting around EV adoption and EV charging. Right now we have over 3,200 residential customers who are participating in our managed EV charging rates, and that is something that we are also thinking about for developing pilots, other rates for multi-unit properties if they're not choosing that level 2 equipment that we can manage through our EV charging rates. In terms of, it is a question we hear about frequently, is the grid ready for electrification? And we've been doing a ton of work to make sure that we have, utility make-ready equipment in stock to support these projects. That's something we've also been talking with the other distribution utilities about in advance of this program, meeting with them frequently to talk about the type of uptake that we might see, a request for chargers in their territories so that we can ensure that folks are able to get their chargers installed within, it's a 12-month timeframe after an award is made. So one of the application requirements for when folks are requesting funding is that they do reach out to their utility to confirm, this is the site that I'm looking at, what might the make-ready cost be, what the lead time for any equipment, so that we'll have successful projects.
And that 3,200 that are on the EV rates, do you know how many of your customers have electric vehicles? Or like how many incentives you've given them, or maybe, how does that relate to how many of the customers are driving electric?
So of the 3,200 customers that we've provided a level 2 charger for, those customers do have electric vehicles. Does that answer your question?
No, I figured that answer.
Yeah.
No, so you say you have 3,200 customers that are on the
on the rate, and then
right
beyond that?
So is that half of the customers? Of the customers that have electric vehicles, how many are on the control charge?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but.
Penetration. And just because it seems like since we're giving out the grant money, this would be a great opportunity to encourage at least, if it's not required, that they
have that interconnection.
Is the rate universally available?
To all of Green Mountain Power's residential customers, if you have a level 2 charger.
My son does.
Yeah,
I pay the electric bill though.
okay,
Uh-huh.
You might not be signed up for the program.
And that's what
Yeah.
I'm thinking. You have to
You
sign
should.
up.
yes, if you have their,
He even controls the heat in his house with, remote.
an app,
So
yeah,
I'm sure he probably could take advantage of the rate.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if there's 3 different types of chargers that, that program supports, that program and that rate. We'd be happy to take a look at.
One that you provided.
Then, yeah, if we provided it, then
Yeah.
we can probably support it.
As long as it's within Wi-Fi range,
Instead of internet connection.
it's gotta be connected.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
like, if it's like on the house, then probably, but if it's like out in the barn or something, then maybe
I don't know if it's connected to.
not. You have to ask him.
Happy to
Good
follow
work.
up with you on that.
Put him to work. Yeah, thank you. I feel like Teddy Roosevelt. I can either be president or manage Alice. So, okay. All right, well, that's something to explore.
Yeah, and other utilities have charging rates too. Okay. So that's the program, and so you're not really weighing in on the House proposal the House proposal is moving money around to add $1.7 million to the program without, other than it just limits it to multifamily housing and businesses, doesn't have that community attraction. And as far as that, choosing where to go, did you work with like Drive Electric or others on trying to figure out where the kind of the biggest need was, or where the biggest bang for the buck was going to be?
No, because again, we were starting from this perspective of there is great need across the entire state relative to this amount of money that we have. So again, we started with that county cap to just make sure every county gets funding. If we were to receive additional funds, either through T-bill, we are also working to get federal funds through CPRG, although that's competitive and who knows if it'll come through. But if we were to get additional funds, I think at that point we would start to, now that we've said, okay, every county has this floor, from there, I think we would start to look at, Chittenden County does have the majority of multi-unit housing. So maybe we need to look at proportional funding based on the target audience that we're trying to reach.
Well, and I also, yes, Senator Shin.
So I'm not against that, and this isn't a provincial attitude at all with regards to the floor, making sure every county gets it. I fully support that for a DC chargers, level 3 chargers. We need those throughout the state. But I would like to track and confirm that, and my impression is electric cars are being much more adopted in more urban settings than rural. You live and you have 40 miles out, the range anxiety is going to be much more compounding factor. So I'd hate for level 1 and level 2s to be floored, preventing them from going where people are buying more electric vehicles, where there's a higher density of living in Chittenden County. But level 3 chargers fully support maintaining and getting those out into the countryside. I just think we should focus our level 1, level 2 dollars where the higher density housing is, where I think.
Well, and I do support knowing where these people are charging, and I also support we can't get left behind, right? So we need to.
A small county minimum.
Well,
The small
yeah,
state is just moving it down.
you gotta give people want to come to the Northeast Kingdom. But I've experienced already. I've experienced people wanting to come to Jay Peak or wanting to come to Burke or wanting to come, and they do have that range anxiety. They really, really do. So they're not gonna come if it's gonna be a stressful situation, they're not gonna come.
The distinction is level 3 is really for the people visiting, level 1 and level 2.
But we don't need 6 Tesla stations in Island Pond. We don't need that. I mean, I get that. But I also think that we should be pushing as hard as we can towards past level 1 into the 2s and 3s.
I want to go back to Senator Pertwig's question, because obviously the amount of money here is relatively small. And the need, it certainly outstrips it by many multipliers. So the question is, did we look at, and we don't want to have certain populations or whatever left behind, but so we have a bill that puts this money here and moves it around. But I don't have a good sense of what was the structured analysis that would have gone on to, this is where we would put the money as opposed to another place in the build out of the EV charging network. Did this come because somebody requested it as opposed to that more comprehensive review and looking at that overall long-term plan where you would want to have, where, whatever that standard might be, where you put, I'm always saying this, where would you put your first dollar? So maybe I didn't interpret your
No,
question
that is
correctly, but
potential.
that's what I'm asking. And as you're looking at this, did this come out because someone said, well, we should really do more here, but, and maybe we should, but how do you make that decision without looking at all the potential needs that are out there and weighing them out and say, well, that would be nice, but relative to what we're seeing in terms of the statewide network, where we're seeing the take up, where we're whatever, this is where we would take the dollars available and invest them first. And that's what I think we're struggling, or I'm struggling with, is that, well, what was the process? What were the other requests? What was the deliberative process that would say, we're gonna make this a priority, that we're gonna take money away from basically maintenance of our highway infrastructure? That is really, from my perspective, what we're trying to decide here. And I don't have a clue.
I think part of this was about equity to have it in multifamily housing, because they don't have the ability to do it themselves, they have to go through.
And that's the argument for doing it,
Yeah, I think that's one of the arguments.
but against the arguments for something else. That's what I'm,
I don't,
I think from our perspective, that was the place where we started, which is there is a lot of investment going into EVs, just EVs generally, and the infrastructure. And if you are a tenant living in a rental property, those are far less accessible to you because you don't have access to home charging. You
And I
can't
think-
rely on level 3 entirely
I
at this point.
understand that because we made that decision.
Yeah.
We put the money there. So I'm not revisiting our, the decisions that we've made. I just don't have a great sense of, I sort of feel like it's like broadband. And for years, every governor said, we're gonna have universal broadband. And then, but nobody said, well, what would it cost? It was gonna be $1 billion. And it was like, well, you're putting out something that in fact, it's not gonna happen tomorrow. So the question becomes one of how do you approach it? What would be sort of, obviously in that case, it was universal, but in this case, what would that redundant, et cetera, what does it look like at the, in the future? And then what are those various components that are getting us there? And so I just don't have any context for this relative to anything else. And it doesn't mean it isn't the most highest and best use of what precious money we have.
Right, and then you read that we're, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, so what would be helpful to you, and that is a great question. I think to date, a lot of the funding has been piecemealed, like
Yeah,
federal money is interested in this and we're interested in this other thing, and piecing it together in Vermont particularly has been kind of challenging. But in the, I think in the proposed, some of the language that was coming out of House Transportation was to, okay, can we start to get a sense of the landscape? What is the strategy here now that we've started seeing how investments are going and what are the needs and where are the challenges? Let's start to put together, like, what does a statewide strategy look like? Where is the money coming from? Where are the places that don't have strong business models just yet and need some more, what does that sort of full picture look like? And I think that would answer the question. And I think we all have that question at this point, but we're still early days.
It's very ad hoc at this point.
Well, then we read that we have more charging stations per capita than any other place, and then at the time where money is very, very precious, you don't want to overbuild something just to, I mean, why build something now where we can build it 3 years from now and still not suffer any service lapses?
If you've only got one fast charging station in this town, you've got a real problem
Yeah.
in a lot of areas of the state. So that's just the reality of where we are now.
Yeah.
But
and does GMP have data on that's publicly available between home chargers and the public stations that are on the GMP network, like usage data?
GMP does have several publicly networked fast chargers, and we do have usage data for those, yes.
Is that, like, have you ever issued a report or anything like on that? It'll say like, here are the highest use charging stations in our area, or that you've shared with either folks like Bronwyn or folks like Dave Roberts at Drive Electric, or like,
Not to my knowledge, and many of the chargers are new within the last year, but happy to look into that.
yeah, it'd be interesting, just thinking of the chargers that I've been to, it'd be interesting to know which ones have a lot of usage. I know some of them seem to be pretty heavily used, and some I've never seen anybody else have kind of thing, so
Yeah.
that would be interesting if you're willing to, if
So-
GMP's willing to share either by kilowatt hours or by hours, just by time or number of charges.
So Green Mountain did have some, now we have Flow. Is Flow the replacement for some of the GMP fast charge?
Yeah, so Flow is a manufacturer that we work with for residential charging and fast chargers. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're a replacement, but they are a vendor that we've had pretty good success with, and they have great customer support.
They're out of Quebec.
Yeah, they're out of Quebec. The product works really well. So in our, as we are installing more public fast chargers, Flow is a vendor that,
Because I've
we've
started
chosen to work
seeing
with.
what used to be a GMP labeled charger.
Yep.
Now has a Flow sign.
Yeah, depends. You can white label many of the chargers, so it might be a Flow charger but have the GMP logo on it. Yep.
Right, well, we will be talking about this more as we look at the T-bill, so thanks for the information, appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you.
1.7 million or 7 million?
1.7.
1.7.
It was 7 million that they had from us for 2022, 2023.
So 10 million, 7 million of which is in GMP. The remaining that we had was the 500,000 for BGS, some admin, and then the remaining of that 10 million that we still have is what we are planning to use to create the floor, and make sure that all counties have at least 486,000.
And then
And after
that
that,
floor, they could use it for one fast charger, or they could use it for a whole bunch of multifamily housing. It doesn't matter how they use it, but they at least get something.
the DC fast charge is not included in that 10% cap.
Okay.
But as we are working with our remaining funds, we may need to consider, like, if a county that is not at their cap yet, but did in fact get a DC fast charge, we might sort of switch the program to say, while we are switching to floors, we would include that DC fast charge investment in that floor. I think the best example at the moment is Essex, I think, has the least, right? So Essex would have room to get a DC fast charge grant and still have some additional funds for more level 2 multifamily and workplace before they need that cap. So we're trying to, work with the funds we have left to sort of make this, at least get to that point of equity across the counties, and then from there, if we have additional funds, figure out the best investment from
So
there.
the amount that's in the House Pass budget for this, is that a figure that where did that come from? Did you recommend that, or?
I didn't.
Okay, well,
I don't.
I was just wondering whether there was a specific.
I think if I had to guess, so when I looked back at my presentation, there was very randomly, there was a lot of times where 1.7 million showed up in the presentation for totally different numbers. So I think that number just might have stuck. But again, it's 1.7 is roughly that amount that we would need to make the cap, what's currently a cap, a floor. So I think that just might have been what seemed like, well, knowing that budgets are tight and knowing we still want to have some funding for this to continue this program, that probably was the sort of number where they landed, I think.
Yeah, maybe that's what they feel like they could take from the other.
This would argue that we do the temporary registration add-on and devote it to our charging.
There you go. For the EVs. There's a lot of logic there.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, and if you do have any of that data,
Yeah, I'll follow up with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.